This is the playbook that I'm going to give you tonight. And here's the big elephant in the room. Nobody is asking about the receipt that's mandated by law. And I'm going to ask tonight about that.
Section 133919 requires law enforcement to provide a detailed itemized receipt for any property seized under a search warrant and to return that receipt to the court within 3 business days. The search warrants for Nancy Guthrie's case were sealed, but the receipt, once served, is public record and someone somewhere has seen it. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Files 911 because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Picture a filing cabinet drawer in the Pima County Sheriff's Evidence Unit.
Sometimes I have learned in my experience that it's the simple yet obvious clues that present themselves. And if you think about these types of cases where, you know, everybody is like, oh, it's so confusing, it's all this and all that. And if you think of this gigantic puzzle sitting on a table somewhere, and I like using this analogy because it's pretty easy to understand. What a murder or a missing person or anything like that, like this, if you think of the suspect coming into a gigantic puzzle on the table and just flipping the table over like the money changers, and stuff just goes everywhere. All right. Well, if you try to assemble this puzzle from the inside out, you'll never get there. A lot of investigators do that. And I've learned over the years that that's not how you assemble a homicide case. What you have to do is you have to find the edges first. And, you know, those square cuts first on a puzzle and put those together. And once you put those together, then you have what it appears to be a picture. So if you assemble the frame and not try to create and paint the picture, then you're much better off in solving the crime. And so in this particular show tonight, we're going to cover a whole bunch of things. But this is an angle that nobody has really come after this thing. And I was talking to Karen, like I said a moment ago, last night in depth, and I was like, you know, I just think there's something that we're missing, that the public's missing, but the sheriff has had it for quite some time. And I'm going to go back real quickly through a couple of principles. And that principle is always, you'll notice the FBI is going back now because of the rains, because of the monsoons. And there's this principle that says, hey, if this is, you know, maybe she's buried somewhere because the note said she's buried somewhere. Maybe Nancy is closer than everybody thinks. And so they've gone back to see if anything has been disturbed or if new odors or scents, you know, have been kicked up. And the one thing, though, that concerns me is I've not seen any type of cadaver dogs or any search and rescue teams running dogs up and around the property again. Maybe they're going to go back. I would go back. I mean, I went back for many times on people that we ultimately, the dog got the scent and hit on it, who were buried. And, you know, it just took a little bit of nature helping you out. And next thing you know it, you know, boom, you get a cadaver dog that hits and you're good to go. At that point, you know, it turns into an archaeological dig and you bring in a forensic anthropologist and, you know, investigators just kind of step back and let them do their thing. Let the experts that know how to do that stuff come in and do it. So I would encourage the sheriff, if you're listening tonight, to run over with your dogs again in that area. You don't need a search warrant for that. You just run them through the backyard, et cetera, in and around the neighborhood again. Because remember the night Brian Enton was out there and the news crews, they were, all those coyotes up there by Annie's house, and they were all standing out front while the cops were inside. The sheriff's department was inside processing that house. Well, let me remind you real fast.
All right, I just wanted to give you guys a little update. Not much has changed here outside Annie Guthrie's house. There's, I think, 3 law enforcement cars. We're not sure what agency they're from. There's this pickup truck, there's an SUV, and then there's another SUV behind there.
Okay, that one. And here's another angle of it that Brian brought up, where they're coming out with bags, and you can see, they're getting back in their trucks. He had just put the bag inside the truck. That other video they just had up shows it to the very end. But so they were over there processing that house, and I have said from the very beginning, okay, wait a minute, something doesn't look right in River City. Remember in Napoleon Dynamite where Uncle Rico reaches into the box and he tells him, if you buy this 24-piece set, that I'm going to go ahead and throw in this, and he reaches in and he pulls out the ship, and the wife looks over at the husband and goes, I want that. And this is one of those things where this is a situation where, that kind of video like this, I want that. I want that because something's cooking here.
Inside that drawer is a single piece of paper. It's not the search warrant itself. It's the receipt, the one that lists every item removed from a blue Honda CRV, the one that was supposed to be handed to the reporting party within 5 days of the vehicle's seizure. That piece of paper is the skeleton key to this entire investigation. It tells you what they found, what they suspected, and what they still don't know. And yet, 6 months later, that drawer remains closed, not because it's locked, but because no one in power wants you to see what's inside. The receipt was mandatory. The Nancy Guthrie case has been defined by contradictions from the moment her daughter Annie reported her missing on February 1st. The sheriff says the family has been cleared. The sheriff says the investigation is active. The sheriff says he has a lot of DNA to process, but he refuses to say what they found. He refuses to say why deputies spent 3 hours inside Annie Guthrie's house on February 7th with alternate light sources. He refuses to explain why 3 vehicles were impounded.
However, what we have heard from the sheriff most recently is the words, we have a lot of DNA, or we have a lot of items we can check for DNA. Well, that's a really interesting comment. And so I started asking myself, and which was the catalyst for tonight's program, well, in my experience, where do we get DNA? Well, we get them from a couple of different places. And in this case, we have a house that was searched, 2 houses, actually 4 houses. Carlos as well, his car, or excuse me, Luke's house, 3 houses. We have multiple cars, and we have multiple cars that were seized. Now, what's interesting here is the Carlos guy, his house was checked out, but Luke's house was also checked out by the FBI, the SWAT team and the evidence response team, and they came in with a federal search warrant. However, Pima County had their own search warrant. And their search warrant was for the vehicle that dropped Nancy Guthrie off.
Nancy's Subaru, Luke's Range Rover, and the reporting party's blue Honda CRV, and why 2 of them were released while the 3rd remains a mystery. The receipt was mandatory. Let's go back to the timeline.
48, we know she's dropped off. Now, we heard earlier, we've heard 2 different things. We've heard both of them dropped her off, the family. We saw that on Sheriff Nanos. He uses that, connects it together, the family. And then, of course, 9:48, and then the garage door closes 9:50. We do not have a data point for the next morning. I'm not going to beat that tonight. 1:47, her doorbell camera is disconnected manually by porch guy with the weeds. Obviously, he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, doing it that way, but so far he's been successful. The next one is 212, a security software detects movement. What the heck does that mean? But no video was saved due to lack of active subscription. Well, we know that's not the case because Kash Patel, pulled a rabbit out of his hat by meeting with the Google executives, and they just happened to have this video that we've now seen. But I had no idea what, software detects movement. What software, where, what kind, again, he, remember the part in Napoleon Dynamite where Earl, they're drinking, the eggs and the orange juice, and they're getting paid in pennies. And they ask Earl, I don't want to get a copyright violation, so I'm not going to play it. But if you want to hear my opinion of what Nanos sounds like, just go listen to Earl describe, across over the mountain, over the mountain over there. Okay, that's the sheriff in terms of how he lays things out. It's just gibberish, right, Sheriff?
And we still need to know what you know, because there's something out there that we don't know.
Now, if he doesn't sound like that character in Napoleon Dynamite, I don't know who does or who doesn't. Anyway, so okay, so that said, we 212, the security software, 228, her pacemaker monitor app disconnects from her phone. A key indicator of when she may have been taken, according to the authorities. So this is, we're kind of nailing it down here because they've nailed it down. Right now, one thing that's really interesting here is I've put 11 a.m. here. I'm still sticking by this because this is what, Mumble said. When Earl said the family got there at 11, and he said it on the very first night around 9:30 in the evening because they had a 10 o'clock hit on the news. He said the family got to the house around 15-ish. As we've talked about that, Earl changed that the next morning to 11:56. So we have a 56-minute jump. I'm not going to go into that tonight, but I think that's important to understand. The first 911 call comes in at 12:03. So if we were to take Mumble's word for it, 11:56 to 12:03, and we know how reliable he is, then that's really about 7-8 minutes on a really expanded view. So in 7-8 minutes, you get a narrative that says everybody searched the home, everybody called the hospitals, 911 was called, and Nancy was definitely not a walk away when the first deputies get on the scene. The first deputies get on the scene at 12:18 in the afternoon. Now, I know that the homicide guys got there at 2 o'clock, 1400. I know this for a fact. Trust me on that one, because I talked to some people that work there. Let me just be clear.
On February 1st, Nancy Guthrie was reported missing from her home in the Catalina Foothills. The doorbell camera was manually disconnected at 1:47 a.m. A security software detected movement at 20:20 a.m., but no video was saved. The first deputies arrived at 12:18 p.m. The homicide unit arrived at 2:00 p.m. On February 3rd, investigators confirmed the blood on the porch was Nancy's.
Third, the investigators confirm, yes, in fact, that was Nancy's blood. Now, the way they did that is, remember, the sheriff said that their machine, their rapid DNA machine, was down. And so they sent it over to Phoenix. Phoenix's rapid DNA machine was up. And I've explained that a couple times, but for those of you who have never heard this before, there is a machine, it's called Andy, and it's a rapid DNA machine that you can take a swab from blood, and you can put it into this rapid DNA machine. And if you have some type of other DNA, it will do a cursory evaluation of whether it's human, and then it will tell you, just kind of give you a window into if it's a match to the type of blood that could be on the porch. Let's say they got a swab from the shirt. Remember the blue shirt that's sitting out there? So you take both of those swabs, and the machine will tell you if they're in the ballpark. And then, of course, you can send it off to other swabs to other labs for a more definitive. But so that's where he came out on February 3rd and said, yes, we know for a fact that's Nancy's blood. Okay, that's good. February 4th, the first video was released. And then, of course, February 5th, the media outlets start getting the ransom notes, etc. But in between all of this, there were some key developments. And what were those key developments? Well, there were some cars seized. The first car that was seized, and we have a total of 3 at this point. And that's what we're going to really talk about tonight. Because not only were was the sheriff's department out at the house taking stuff out of the house,
but they've definitely been in the house taking photos. Like, there's no question about that, because we've seen the flashes, and we have some of the flashes on.
By February 4th, the first video was released. By February 5th, the ransom notes began arriving at TMZ. But in between those dates, something happened. 3 vehicles were seized. Search warrants were executed. Photographs were taken with alternate light sources. And somewhere in that window, a receipt was generated. A receipt that, by law, had to be handed to the owner of that blue Honda CRV. Here's the problem. Under Arizona law, once a search warrant is issued, the executing officer has 5 days to execute it. Once executed, they have 3 court business days to return the receipt to the court. That means, at the most, you have about 13 days to complete the search, inventory everything, and get that receipt filed. After that, the warrant expires. And any evidence seized after that expiration becomes fruit of the poisonous tree. The receipt was mandatory. So what happens when you hold a vehicle for 45 days? What happens when you keep a car in evidence for weeks without returning it to the family? What happens when the reporting party, the family that called 911, is the one whose car is being impounded? You have to answer those questions. The law demands it. The court demands it. The defense, if there ever is one, will demand it. Now consider the context. The sheriff had already promoted Sergeant David Stivers to lieutenant, despite Stivers being reprimanded 2 months earlier for poor judgment in securing crime scene evidence in another homicide case. The same sergeant who was blamed for delays, who was known for making mistakes, who had never worked a homicide before being put in charge of the unit. That same sergeant was the one who would have authorized the impound. That same sergeant was the one who would have signed off on the search warrant. That same sergeant was the one who would have had to return the receipt to the court. What are the chances that the receipt was properly served? What are the chances that the chain of custody was maintained? What are the chances that the family actually received a copy of everything that was taken out of their car? Ticking clock moment. If the sergeant who mishandled evidence before was the one signing off on the seizure, and if the search warrant was executed under a department that punishes loyalty over competence, and if the receipt is supposed to be public record but remains sealed, then what was actually found in that car? If the state is hiding the very document that proves what they know, are we supposed to believe they did everything right? This isn't speculation. This is the law. Section 1339919A of the Arizona Penal Code requires a detailed itemized receipt. It requires that receipt to be given to the person whose property is seized, or left at the premises if no one is present. It requires that receipt to be returned to the court. It requires a sworn affidavit from the officer confirming that the inventory matches the seizure. And if any of those steps are skipped, the evidence is compromised. The defense can attack it. The case falls apart. But here is the forensic truth. The reporting party's car was impounded. It was processed. It was torn apart. Parts were removed. The vehicle was held for an extended period. And then, at some point, it was released. It was returned to the family, but not until after investigators had been inside Annie Guthrie's house with alternate light sources, pulling items from the home, bagging them, and walking them out to waiting vehicles. Not until after the FBI had served a federal search warrant on Luke's Range Rover. Not until after the sheriff had publicly stated that the family had been cleared. If the family is cleared, why was the car impounded?
That house is sitting on a piece of paper that has been returned to the reporting party. And how do we know that? because every item that was checked out, i.e. the court or the car, from the evidence facility, from this evidence facility, and that's their sign right there on the right, you have to have a reason to do that. And it's not just, well, they've been cleared. You could have been ordered to do it. Kind of like Navarro just did, where that detective recently was suspended for failing to follow an unlawful order.
If the car was impounded under a search warrant, why was the receipt not made public? If the receipt is public record, why has no one asked to see it? The receipt was mandatory. Let's look at the practice. In Arizona, the search warrant is not the end of the process. It is the beginning. The warrant grants permission to search. The seizure is the action. The receipt is the accountability. It is the document that ties everything together. It is the document that a defense attorney will wave in front of a jury if the investigation ever goes to trial. It is the document that will show whether the detectives were thorough or sloppy. It is the document that will prove whether the sheriff was protecting the investigation or protecting himself. And right now, that document is sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere. It has been served. It has been signed. It has been filed, but no one is talking about it. No one is asking for it. No one is demanding to see what was taken from that blue Honda CRV. What does the receipt show? Does it show blood? Does it show fibers? Does it show a strand of hair that doesn't belong to the family? Does it show a piece of paper with a ransom note? Does it show a phone that wasn't Nancy's? Does it show a GPS device? Does it show a weapon? Does it show nothing at all? If it shows nothing, then the seizure was a mistake. If it shows nothing, then the department wasted resources impounding an innocent family's car. If it shows nothing, then the sheriff owes the family an apology. But if it shows something, if it shows evidence that points away from the family, then why is it still sealed? Why hasn't the sheriff held a press conference and said, "We found this," and it cleared them? There is only one answer. The receipt tells a story that someone doesn't want you to hear. Now consider the public pressure. The sheriff is facing calls for his removal. The County Board of Supervisors is investigating his conduct.
And so that release decision is going to be huge. It's going to be absolutely huge because the prosecutor had to be involved in that decision as well, unless they didn't know that it was going to happen. Unless they didn't know. The deputy county attorney had to be consulted to release a vehicle.
That require every item seized to be logged, tracked, and documented. The chain of custody is supposed to be unbreakable. The receipt is supposed to be served. The court is supposed to be informed. But in this case, the court has said nothing. The sheriff has said nothing. The family has said nothing. And the public is left to wonder, what did they find in that car? And why won't they tell us? This is the moment where the narrative of the active investigation meets the unbreakable rule of evidence law. If the sheriff wants to clear the family, he needs to show the receipt. If he wants to prove he handled the case properly, he needs to show the receipt. If he wants to maintain public trust, he needs to show the receipt. But if he shows the receipt, he admits what he found. And if what he found isn't what he wanted, he admits his investigation was flawed. The receipt was mandatory. Call to research, we are directing you to the public records of the Pima County Superior Court, case number C-22601-98. That is the criminal case file associated with the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Search the filings for the return of search warrant document. It will list every item seized from the blue Honda CRV. Read it for yourself. Then ask yourselves in the comments, if the family has been cleared, why is the receipt still sealed? If the investigation is active, why is the sheriff hiding the evidence list? And if the court has already reviewed it, why hasn't it been made public? This is a sad story. It is a tragedy of incompetence, ego, and the blunt force of the justice system. Savannah Guthrie's family has been through hell. They have lost their mother. They have watched the investigation spiral. They have been forced to wait while the sheriff's department fumbles through the evidence. But the story is not just about a missing woman. It is about a system that refuses to be transparent. It is about a sheriff who won't show the receipts. It is about a legal standard that demands accountability and a department that seems determined to avoid it. This is Crime Files 9/11. We follow the evidence. We ask the questions that don't have easy answers. If you found this analysis valuable, hit like, share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of this case, and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next installment in this unfolding story. We will be watching the court filings, we will be reading the receipts, and we will be back.